And
Wow.
so my abstract, when I began, I say that Jesus said to his followers, go make disciples
Hmm.
of all nations, and I will build my church. And through 50 years of emphasis on church growth, it would seem that the roles have been reversed and more pastors are focused on building big churches
Mm.
more than equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. And so it begs the question that everything of my dissertation boiled down to. Do we use people to grow the church instead of the church to grow the people?
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of the Leaders Seminary. You are in for a treat. I get to interview Dr. Tammy Dunahoo. Now, for those of you who don't know who Dr. Tammy is, she's actually one of the best leaders that I know of, and I've had the opportunity to get to know her over the last 5 years as we went through the master's program at Portland Seminary together, and we did the same doctoral program. And so I've got to see her leadership up close and personal, as well as get to know her on a personal level, and she is just amazing. A little bit about Tammy and the person you're going to hear from. She is a part of the Foursquare Church, and since 2003, she served in multiple roles in that church at the highest levels, including General Supervisor, Arkansas District Supervisor, as well as Vice President of Women in Leadership Ministry, and many other boards and committees. And her and her husband pastored for 38 years. And so she has literally more wisdom on leadership than I have been alive. And so I'm excited for you to hear from Dr. Tammy Dunahoo and about church growth culture, why it's important, the difference between growing an organization and growing people that help grow the organization. And so sit back, take some notes, enjoy this interview with Dr. Tammy Dunahoo. Let's go. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Leaders Seminary, where we are understanding how theology and leadership work together. And as I said in the intro, we have the distinct honor of welcoming one of my good friends, one of my cohort members in my doctoral program, Dr. Tammy Dunahoo, on the episode today. Tammy, welcome. We're so glad that you're here.
Thanks, Mario. Great to join you.
Yes, and as I said in the intro, me and Tammy, we went through our master's program together. We went through our doctoral program together. And this is the first official time, at least kind of in person, virtually, that I get to call you Dr. Tammy. So once again, congratulations. It's been an awesome journey to go along with you. And I know that you have a lot of wisdom in you. And so hopefully we can pull some of that out on this episode. And one of the questions that I love to start with every episode is this question here. In your own words, what does the phrase leadership mean to you?
Mario, Dr. Mario.
Yeah.
I love to call you that too. For me, leadership is a function, and it is influencing people toward God's purposes in God's way.
Yeah.
When I think of a leader, it's really a maturing disciple with a kingdom focus.
That's awesome. I love that. And I know you, and so I understand a lot of where your heart is coming from. But for those of you who don't know Dr. Tammy, some of the key phrases that stick out to me, and we're going to jump into her dissertation here in just a little bit, but it's the word maturing. I love that idea of leadership. So in your words, again, when you think of the term maturing, what does that mean to you?
Becoming more like Christ in every way. The way that I have talked about disciple making and becoming a disciple, see, leaders never stop being disciples.
Yeah.
The Apostle Peter never stopped being disciple Peter. And we see that because at the end of his life is where we actually see the humility that had been in process of formation all of his life happens when he is recorded to have asked to be hung upside down because he was not worthy to be crucified like his Lord. The Peter that we read about much earlier in his life didn't have that disposition.
Right.
But because he remained a disciple while he was leading, he was constantly growing and becoming like Christ.
I love that. And again, when I'm listening to you talk, there's a lot that's coming up, but maybe, well, let's just jump into your dissertation. I think you talk about this a little bit. And for those out there who've maybe never gone through higher academics, it's hard to talk about everything in your dissertation because you study a lot, you write a lot, and so I'm not going to quiz you on every single thing. You've already been through that process. So maybe in the most general terms, because what we'll do is we'll link Dr. Tammy's dissertation in the show notes. So if you want to read that, you can and get the full download of that. But can you give us a general overview of your topic and then what you covered and what you see as a benefit of that dissertation to the church?
Sure. I wrote very specifically to the culture of the church that I belong to. Our tradition is the Foursquare Church, and we're about to celebrate 100 years.
Wow.
And so I did a deep dive into our history and to how we think about leader development and maturing and growth. And what I discovered is we've had lots of programs, we've had lots of initiatives, but nothing that lasts. And through this, I came to believe deeply that we are feeling the effects of 50 years of the church growth movement. So Mario, in fact, this month, we're celebrating 40 years in pastoral ministry.
Wow.
When my husband and I began. And what I've discovered is we came into ministry in the early 1981 and began in 1979 learning and growing, and then started into pastoral ministry in 81. So we were fully trained in all things leadership and church growth. Peter Drucker, John Maxwell, all of the things that created then the contemporary church model. And I ended up seeing over a period of time how we had focused on building the church and not so much on building the people. And so my abstract, when I began, I say that Jesus said to his followers, go make disciples of all nations, and I will build my church. And through 50 years of emphasis on church growth, it would seem that the roles have been reversed and more pastors are focused on building big churches more than equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. And so it begs the question that everything of my dissertation boiled down to. Do we use people to grow the church instead of the church to grow the people?
Wow. That's good. And I can hear, which, in your dissertation, you had to cover probably the other side of the argument. And so I can hear people say, well, there's the phrase out there that, all healthy things grow. Maybe there's some people, when they hear that, especially leaders, and let's say even specifically, American or Westernized church leaders, they have this understanding that, the only way that we know that, we're doing God's will or leading a successful church is by the organization growing. And what I hear you saying is that, if you are building healthy people, then maybe a fruit of that is a growing organization. But the aim of leadership and the discipleship is the focus to be on the people, not necessarily growing the organization, even though that may be a part of that. Is that correct?
Exactly. Organizational principles work. And so if you use them and you have some sense of leadership and charisma about you, you will probably grow a larger organization. But it doesn't mean the people within the organization are growing. And that's my point. So what I did a lot of work on is where the word culture came from. And what I found out that I loved is it's from the historic Latin word of cultura. And it actually meant toward growth and development. So that was the intent. So whatever is placed within a culture will become like it. So it grows into whatever the ground is. So I think of everything, Mario, I was a farmer's daughter. So I think of everything around the idea of crops and growth. And so an organization would be the soil that a person is planted in. And then there's a framework that I discovered through my research about how people truly grow. And only 20% of our growth comes through head knowledge.
Wow.
If we don't have the full framework of relationship and practice and those working together, then we don't have growth. And that's what I see lacking. And when I look at the results, for instance, we've been through a pandemic. We've been through social tension. We've been through political tension. Our nation is extremely divided. And I don't see the church, the capital C church, rising with the character of Christ, the mission of Christ, the loves of Christ. I don't see that emerging and leading in our culture, in our society, in a perfect opportunity for us to do that.
Yeah.
And so when I question why is that, I have to wonder, is it because we were focused on growing large organizations, getting more people into it, more people deciding to follow Jesus, but then not growing those people to mature, to look like him?
That's really, really good. And it answers a question that I was going to ask you, because the title of your dissertation is Cultivating a Disciple-centric Growth Culture in the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel, which you've already mentioned that you were very specific in your focus, which we all have to be when you're writing your dissertation, because there's 1,001 different ways you can go, but a good advisor will help you narrow that down to one specific area. And I did a quick search of your dissertation, and I'm going to do a deep dive read of it. But you mentioned growth culture 110 times in your dissertation. And my question for you, and you kind of already answered this, but you can give us a little bit more of your wisdom, is what is the difference between a church growth culture and a growth culture, if that makes sense?
Yeah. It's disciple-centric versus church-centric. So I think as an organization, the capital C church has become more organizational church-centric than people-centric. And so what I'm trying to do is help us shift our focus. Because I do believe that if people are growing and then you use good organizational principles, your organization will grow.
Right.
But the outcome is that you will have people. And so the churches that I did 3 field research projects on 3 different kinds of churches across America. And I had already developed the framework. And what I went was to field test them and prove and see, do these really emerge in these different churches? How do they emerge? And if something's missing, why? And all 8 markers emerge strong, although in different ways and expressions because of the culture or the size or the geographic area of the church. But the markers themselves were there. And so that was very encouraging to me.
Yeah.
So you will see in the dissertation in the end, I have put the entire dissertation into one diagram. And it's basically the center of it is growth. The next 3 quadrants you would see would be what is growth. So what does Jesus want us to grow in? And I've put it into 3 things. Then I've got the 3 ways that we grow in those things as human beings. And then I've got 5 markers of an organization. So how does an organization create an environment for that to happen? And so I'm looking at individual markers of growth and organizational markers or collective markers of growth.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Leaders Seminary, understanding how theology and leadership work together. If you've enjoyed this content, do me a favor, turn the like button blue, and maybe even subscribe to stay up to date with all of the content that's coming to this channel. And while you're at it, check out one of the other episodes that you see on the screen now, and I'll see you in the next one.